So as opposed to a child who, despite living in poverty or having biological predeterminants, still has protective factors, in another case, a child may be born into a broken family, a completely destabilized social environment in which they feel isolated and helpless in a potentially hostile world. Because our brains are so deeply interlinked with our social bonds, this can cripple a child, an individual, in a myriad of ways. Epigenetically, as I mentioned before, behaviorally, the child starts exhibiting defiance and maladjustment in school, for example. And, as someone who's practiced as a school psychologist, I talked about that more fully in this video right here. And even socially, in that child grows up with this prolonged social threat. They lose their ability to initiate, seek out, and maintain relationships in their social environments. Their brain constantly fires what is called the suspicion system. This is taking a page out of cognitive psychology. This is a system in our brain which seeks to detect evidence for others' malign intentions towards us. And this passes through the reflective system situated in our prefrontal cortex, analyzing these strands of data, whether this makes sense, right? We're cut off in traffic. What's our initial response? Usually we're very reactive, right? Most of us, but usually most of us are able to filter that response through our prefrontal cortex, right? We're not going to follow that person home and risk going to jail, right? We curse at them for a little bit, but we'll go about our day, right? Someone who has schizophrenia or active persistent delusion will feel like this person followed them and has been following them for weeks, right? Both Dr. Golds in the book Suspicious Minds summate that for those with persistent delusions, the suspicion system wins over the reflection system and actually changes the process of the reflection system. Instead of examining evidence for a threat, which is what the reflection system does, and filtering it, it takes the threat as fact and begins integrating it into a coherent worldview. So we know the risk factors for urbanization are abundant. We can make a complete separate video on pollutants in a city environment, dietary, physical health, but at a psychological level, these risk factors come down to higher vigilance threat and prolonged fear response. And a shout out to the film, really underrated film which came out this year on HBO called We're All Going to the World's Fair, which does a great job looking at how technology can be used to magnify this seemingly bizarre, paranoid, delusional worldview, and how the internet itself has shifted an entire generation's understanding of delusion and reality. So check out that film. I always give a shout out to a bunch of films through the course of these videos for those watching for the first time.
I see you there, even if you won't show your face. I swear, someday soon, I am just gonna disappear. And you won't have any idea what happened to me.
But what about the role of technology? Aren't we all undergoing delusions as a consequence of the present times? The book details how social circumstances, such as the passing of the Patriot Act, which disbanded personal privacy, and the emergence of social media, or the virtual fluidity of our social relationships and our social lives in general, predicts unique forms of thought disorders, such as what I mentioned in the beginning part of the video, the Truman Show syndrome, which we saw the first cases of not long after 9/11, and the Y2K hysteria, for those of us who can remember. We are now exposed to a far greater number of unknown others than ever before in our history, which predicts unique things such as materialism and narcissism, as I outlined in my Dark Side of Spirituality series right here, and also on my website. But also, it expands and tests the broadband of our psychological capabilities. Going forward, we will have individuals becoming so intertwined with their technology and the mechanized intelligence specifically suited for them it will be difficult to separate delusion from reality. And a shout out to the Spike Jonze 2013 film Her, which I included in my top 10 films of the entire previous decade right here. This film is worth mentioning because we think about these inevitabilities, the emergence of technology in our present society, and forecast a bleak reality like Terminator with Skynet. But Her, the film, does a really great job in delving into how we can use technology for love, connection, in a manner which does not completely debilitate our interaction with reality. Beyond technology, other risk factors can also include things like globalism, corporate greed, and financial inequality. The book includes this alarming statistic that if you took the subway from Montgomery County in Maryland, which is an affluent suburban area, to downtown Washington, D.C., for every mile you pass, the life expectancy lowers by a year and a half. That means only over a 12-mile radius, you have people living on average 20 years less than others. Social inequality and the perpetuation of social inequality is perhaps the strongest risk factor for all mental health issues, and we find that imbalance more in city regions because poor people cannot afford moving out to a substandard gated community. The vulnerability model, as outlined by Joseph Zubin, situates that although genetic makeup may predispose a person to disorders such as a thought delusion, because schizophrenia isn't fully manifested until one matures or reaches adulthood. You can have prodromal symptoms such as acute personality changes in adolescence, which I'm linking more right here, more information right here. Those early life events are critical and should orient us towards a more preventative model of health and healing. Right? That's at a more systematic approach and at a more individual approach, right? Let's take one concrete example to help understand how we can make those systematic and individual changes. In doing research for this video, I found, without even intending to find this out, one of the most research-based examples of subsequent thought delusion and life impairment is early cannabis usage. As outlined in this article right here, accounting for around 1,500 adolescents, cannabis usage leads to lower levels of cortical thickness, especially in males, which partially explains why males show early signs of schizophrenia as compared to females who mature at an earlier age. This is very important as someone who supports ending the war on drugs and decriminalization or even legalization of most substances, employing an individual, media, social, school, psychoeducational effort to reduce early onset usage of cannabis is needed as we move state to state to eventually federal legalization. I know from my clinical work, many 12, 13, 14, 15-year-olds who regularly smoke marijuana. I've even had people come into my clinic who are 15, 16-year-olds and they report smoking marijuana with their parents because of its perceived harmlessness and lacks cultural taboos as we move forward as compared to 20 years ago. Most of these people, right, when you're working in a clinic, you have individuals who they're just not aware that their 16-year-old son smoking marijuana so often, yeah, it's making them more calm, but that short-term beneficial impact is at the risk of some potentially long detrimental effects on the adult that you want them to become, right? We have previous models that we can follow, right? Nicotine used to be consumed very regularly by adolescents, and now it's fallen by almost 100%, and I'm putting some statistics right here, right? So that took an individual, social, educational, systematic employment to try and understand its detrimental impact and educate our populace,